I'm 36, 8 years deep into a carefully curated engagement with Guin, the heir to a multi-million-dollar local construction conglomerate. Everyone in our social circle labels us the perfect match. He's polished, wealthy, endlessly attentive to every trivial want I voice. Or so I believed up until the morning of our mandatory premarital physical screening. I'd scheduled the full panel exam with him side by side at a premium private medical clinic, fully convinced we were laying equal ground for a transparent, loyal marriage. When the nurse directed me to wait outside the ECG suite while Guin completed his cardiac scans, I pulled out my phone to fire off text to my closest friend Linwei, gushing about how thoughtful my fiancé was for prioritizing shared medical accountability before our wedding ceremony the following month. A soft, hesitant tug caught the cuff of my blazer mid-typing. I snapped my head upward to find Dr. Li Wenjing, the middle-aged intake physician who'd logged both our personal details at check-in. Her facial muscles were pulled tight with unmasked dread, eyes darting repeatedly toward the closed ECG door, as if terrified Gu might overhear a single syllable she spoke to me. She lowered her voice to a barely audible murmur, every word weighted with urgent desperation. You haven't filed marriage paperwork yet, correct? Break it off immediately, while you still can walk away clean. I froze where I sat on the hard plastic waiting bench, every thought grinding to a halt. I'd spent years building trust in Gu's gentle public persona. The idea there existed a critical, unspoken danger I'd completely overlooked was impossible to process in that split second. I stammered out a half-coherent reply, my brain still refusing to parse her crypt, alarming instruction. Wait, what do you mean? We're set to register our license in 30 days. We've locked in the venue and all vendor contracts already. Dr. Li didn't waste a single extra second elaborating verbally, fully aware the clinic's security audio recording systems could capture every conversation held in the corridor. She fished a folded stack of printed medical documentation out of her white coat's inner pocket, pressed the crinkled paper firmly into my palm, and pivoted to melt back into the stream of clinic staff without another sentence exchanged. Her hurried retreat left me alone amid dozens of chatting patients, clutching the mysterious paperwork while my heart hammered so hard I could hear its thuds ringing in my own ears. I ducked into a quiet, unoccupied restroom stall to unfold the pages, fingers trembling so violently I nearly dropped the entire packet onto the tiled floor. The top sheet bore a faded, years-old hospital patient header. The name scrawled across the top line reading Zhang Qian, Gu's ex-wife, the woman he'd casually dismissed to me countless times as a greedy gold digger who'd emptied their joint bank accounts and eloped with a wealthy businessman back when his firm faced temporary cash flow shortages. Gu had framed their entire divorce as her unforgivable betrayal, painting himself as the wounded, forgiving victim who'd mourned her loss for years before meeting me. Line by line, the diagnostic notes seared themselves into my retinas, each clinical observation a brutal revelation of sustained domestic violence. Multiple recurrent blunt force soft tissue contusions across torso and extremities, non-union healed left wrist fracture from repeated impact trauma, compound rib fractures with evidence of rebreakage on 2 separate hospital admissions, chronic mild post-concussion syndrome stemming from repeated cranial blows. The handwritten physician addendum at the bottom of the report made my blood run cold. Patient exhibits classic Stockholm syndrome symptomology, requires full separation from perpetrator plus long-term intensive psychiatric intervention to recover from persistent coercive control and physical abuse. A perpetrator, that single word split open every fabricated narrative Gu had fed me for 6 years of dating. All the tiny, off moments I'd brushed off as stress or minor personality quirks suddenly clicked into a horrific, cohesive pattern of predatory manipulation. My back broke out in a cold flood of perspiration that soaked through the fabric of my blouse as I crumpled the documents tight in my fist, desperate to hide them before Gu emerged from the ECG room and spotted the evidence in my grasp. The suite door slid open behind me before I could fully compose my expression. Gu stepped out wearing the crisp white button-down shirt I'd gifted him for our anniversary, that familiar warm, indulgent smile plastered across his features as he closed the distance between us in slow, easy strides. He tilted his head, studying my ashen, drained facial features with manufactured concern, one hand lifting to brush a strand of hair off my forehead in the tender gesture I'd once adored. You look completely drained, baby. Are you having low blood sugar again from skipping breakfast this morning? Every gentle touch now burned against my skin like heated metal, the underlying menace I'd never previously recognized thrumming beneath his calm exterior crystal clear for the first time. I forced a shallow, unconvincing laugh to mask my spiraling panic, tucking the folded medical record deep into the inner lining of my crossbody handbag, where he couldn't spot it at a glance. Just the crowd noise and strong disinfectant fumes giving me a minor headache, nothing serious at all. He slipped an arm around my shoulders to steer me toward the clinic's front exit, his grip firmer than usual, without him seeming to register the subtle shift in pressure. We climbed into his luxury sedan, and he cued my favorite folk playlist through the vehicle's stereo system, chattering nonstop about floral centerpiece designs and invitation color palettes for our upcoming wedding reception as we merged onto the highway back to our shared downtown apartment. I stared blankly out the passenger window at the passing streetlights, my mind racing to cross-reference every lie he'd constructed about Zhang Qian against the damning medical proof I'd just uncovered. I crafted a casual, offhand question to test his reaction, feigning idle curiosity to avoid triggering overt hostility before I could secure more corroborating evidence. I just remembered something random while we were waiting. Your ex-wife's name is Zhang Qian, right? I haven't asked you many details about your prior marriage before now. The second that name left my mouth, Gu's grip on the steering wheel tightened hard enough to whiten his knuckles, a micro-flash of venomous irritation flickering across his face before he smoothed his features back into a mournful, wounded mask in less than a heartbeat. He sighed dramatically, glancing over at me with a performative blend of sorrow and disdain. Why dig up such unpleasant history right now? That woman was consumed by material greed the entire time we were married. When my father's construction firm hit a liquidity crunch 3 years prior, she drained every savings account and pawned all family heirlooms to run off with a foreign real estate developer she'd been secretly seeing behind my back. I latched onto a critical inconsistency in his fabricated backstory instantly, a tiny detail that unraveled his entire false narrative without him realizing I'd caught the contradiction. Last month, I'd attended a family dinner at his mother Lu Mei's residential villa. She dragged me over to her antique jewelry cabinet, unlocking a velvet-lined storage box to display a high-grade jade bangle passed down through 3 generations of their paternal lineage. She'd explicitly told me the heirloom had never left the family's possession, scoffing at the idea Zhang could have absconded with all their valuables, like Gu claimed. If she'd stolen every piece of their jewelry, as he alleged, that jade bracelet would have vanished alongside the rest of their assets. I stored that vital contradiction away in my memory as a secondary layer of proof, continuing to play the oblivious, trusting fiancé for the remainder of our drive home. Once we pulled into the underground parking garage beneath our apartment tower, I mentally mapped out a 2-phase plan. First, covertly source more independent verification of Zhang Qian's fate. Second, find a secure method to connect with Dr. Li again without alerting Gu's pervasive surveillance habits. He'd installed location tracking software on every shared device we owned, a fact I'd previously written off as harmless romantic care. Back inside our apartment unit, Gu immediately retreated into the open-concept kitchen to prep my go-to sweet and sour pork dish, humming soft love songs under his breath while chopping fresh ingredients. I locked the master bedroom door behind me the second I slipped away from the living room, sliding the deadbolt fully into place to carve out a private window of time to investigate Zhang Qian's disappearance online without his knowledge. I pulled the crumpled medical record out of my bag, scanned every page with my phone camera, and uploaded all high-resolution scans to an encrypted cloud storage folder only I held login credentials for, an offshore account Gu had zero access to, created years prior before we'd moved in together. Once the evidence was safely archived, I pulled up a local archived forum database on my laptop, filtering all public posts from 3 years prior, the exact window Gu claimed Zhang abandoned their household to elope overseas. I typed her full legal name into the search bar, scrolling through hundreds of irrelevant matching profiles before a single buried thread caught my eye. The post title read Urgent Missing Person Appeal. Has anyone seen my older sister Zhang Qian? The account poster operated under a random string of meaningless alphanumerics, clearly a throwaway anonymous profile created to avoid retaliation from Gu's influential family. I clicked the thread open, my breath catching in my throat as I read the brief, desperate body text dated 3 winters prior. My sister vanished after a vicious domestic argument with her husband. She would never abandon her chronically ill mother voluntarily. If any witnesses spotted her near the East District abandoned warehouse complex, please reach out to this private contact number. Substantial cash reward offered for credible leads. A low-resolution photo attachment sat at the bottom of the post. Zhang's soft, gentle facial features matching the name on Dr. Li's medical report perfectly. Every detail of her brother's plea directly contradicted Gu's polished narrative of a greedy runaway abandoning all family ties. The warehouse address cited in the post burned itself into my memory, a geographic clue I planned to pursue once I'd built a larger body of corroborating evidence. Before I could dig deeper into comment threads, my phone's ringtone blared to life, the caller ID displaying Lu Mei, Gu's mother. I steeled myself for a confrontational lecture, answering the call with a neutral, casual tone to mask my mounting suspicion. Good evening, Aunt Lu. What can I help you with? Her warm, overly hospitable tone from the family dinner vanished entirely, replaced by sharp, accusatory frost the instant she responded. Gu just called me to say you've been pestering him about that disgraceful ex-wife of his. Let me make one thing crystal clear for you, Yun. Any mention of that woman brings misfortune onto our household. Pretend she's deceased from this point forward, and don't bring her name up ever again. The blunt, unfiltered choice of wording sent a cold shiver racing down my spine. She'd casually referenced Zhang as if she'd already passed away, as if the entire family had collectively agreed to erase her existence from public record entirely. I murmured a placating agreement to end the call quickly, hanging up the line and sinking back against the bedroom desk chair, a horrifying possibility, solidifying in my mind. What if Zhang hadn't run off with a wealthy stranger at all? What if she'd been killed at Gu's hands 3 years prior, and his entire family had coordinated a massive cover-up to shield him from criminal prosecution? Gu's footsteps echoed down the hallway outside the bedroom door minutes later, a soft knock sounding against the wood frame as he called my name through the barrier. "Baby, dinner's finished. Come out and eat before the sauce cools off." I folded all browser tabs shut, cleared my search history completely, and tucked the printed medical document back into my bag before unlocking the door and stepping back into the living room to sit across from him at the dining table. The glistening plate of sweet and sour pork sat centered on the table, the same meal he'd cooked hundreds of times to placate me during minor disagreements. Every sweet tang of the sauce now carried an underlying metallic aftertaste of deceit as I forced small bites down my throat to maintain my oblivious act. Gu watched my every micro-expression while he ate, his gaze lingering on my face as he brought up the subject of Jean again, unprompted, doubling down on his fabricated abandonment story to reinforce the false narrative he needed me to accept unconditionally. I don't understand why you'd fixate on someone who threw away everything we built for a shallow fling. All the financial stress and heartbreak I endured back then isn't something I care to relive, especially with our wedding just weeks away. I seized the opportunity to plant a subtle trap, framing my follow-up question as innocent curiosity to gauge his unguarded reaction. It's just strange to me that none of your friends or extended family have ever mentioned her over all these years. Usually a former spouse would come up in casual group conversation at some point. Gu's jaw tightened, his fork clattering hard against the ceramic dinner plate as he set the utensil down with unnecessary force. We all reached an unspoken agreement to erase her from our collective memory after what she did. Why waste mental space on a person who betrayed every vow they made? Right as he finished speaking, my phone's ringtone cut through the tense silence. Lin Wei, my closest lifelong friend, calling for a pre-planned emergency signal we'd agreed upon weeks prior for moments I needed an immediate alibi to escape our shared apartment without arousing Gu's suspicion. I answered the call on speakerphone, letting Lynn deliver a scripted breakdown about a violent fight with her long-term boyfriend to manufacture a believable crisis requiring my urgent presence at her residence across town. "I'll leave right this second to comfort you. Don't panic. Just hold tight until I arrive." I shot up from the dining chair to grab my coat and handbag, making a deliberate show of rushing toward the front entryway. Gu stood and moved to block my path, his tone shifting from mild concern to thinly veiled suspicion as he scrutinized my rushed movements. "It's pouring rain outside. Let me drive you over to her apartment so you don't catch a cold." I refused his offer outright, inventing a fabricated fear of his vehicle's slippery brake lines to avoid letting him tag along and monitor my whereabouts. The last time we drove in, heavy rain or brakes skidded across the highway. "I'll grab a rideshare instead. It's safer for everyone." He hesitated for several long heartbeats, weighing whether to push harder to accompany me before finally stepping aside with a cold, bitter stare. "Text me the second you arrive at her place, and call once you're ready for me to pick you back up late tonight." I nodded a quick acknowledgement and bolted out the front door, not daring to glance back at the apartment complex's windows where I knew he'd stand watching my taxi pull away from the curb to track my destination. The taxi ride to Lin Wei's apartment gave me uninterrupted time to sort through every scattered thread I'd gathered so far, untangling Gu and his layered manipulation tactics piece by piece. Lin threw her front door open the second the cab pulled up to the curb, yanking me inside and locking the deadbolt tight the instant I crossed the threshold. The second the door clicked shut, all the fake panic I'd faked over the phone melted off my face, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion I hadn't let anyone witness yet. She pulled me onto her sofa, pressed a mug of warm ginger tea into my hands, and waited silently for me to unpack every terrifying detail from the clinic encounter and Gu's contradictory lies. I laid the scanned medical report printout across her coffee table, pointing to the lines detailing repeated bone fractures and post-trauma psychological damage. Lynn's eyes widened more and more as she read, her fingers tightening around the edge of the paper until the cardstock crinkled under her grip. "This isn't just petty domestic abuse, Yun. This is systematic torture. And he's been lying to you about her vanishing for 3 whole years. If she really ran off with her rich lover, her brother wouldn't post a desperate missing person thread begging for witnesses." I nodded, pulling up the archived forum post on my phone to show her the warehouse address cited in the appeal. The East Side Abandoned Factory District is where she was last seen, according to her sibling's account. Gu always brushes that area off as worthless industrial wasteland whenever I bring up local real estate, never explaining why his company bought a vacant plant there 3 years back right after she disappeared. Lynn leaned forward, elbows braced on her knees, her tone sharp with strategic clarity. "We can't march back to that private clinic to confront Dr. Lee directly. Gu has connections all over the city's medical network, and if word gets back to him that she handed you confidential patient records, she'll lose her medical license instantly. Maybe even face legal retaliation from his family's legal team. We need a discreet, untraceable way to reach her without triggering Gu's surveillance tools." I'd spent the entire taxi ride brainstorming a safe communication route, and I pulled up a national medical consultation app on my phone to show her the solution I'd mapped out. The platform lets users book anonymous text-based specialist consultations without sharing personal ID numbers. Her profile lists secondary hospital shifts every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon. Today's Wednesday, so she's off-site. We can register a brand new account under your name with 0 links to mine. Send a coded message asking to meet somewhere completely public and off Goo's regular patrol routes. Lynn grabbed my phone without hesitation, creating a fresh user profile, while I drafted a brief, cryptic message that wouldn't trigger platform content filters or tip off any system monitors. I'm the woman you warned at premarital screening yesterday. Need to speak privately about the patient file you gave me. Request offline neutral venue meeting, no hospital premises, no shared electronics to avoid tracking. 15 minutes passed with both of us staring at the waiting chat window, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. I'd half convinced myself Dr. Lee would refuse to risk her career to speak with me when the typing indicator flickered to life on screen. Her reply popped up seconds later, short and deliberately vague to evade algorithm flagging. Clear schedule for 3 p.m. today at Clearwind Tea House, second floor, Lanting private booth. Come alone. Leave all mobile devices at your residence before traveling. No exceptions for safety. The strict instruction to abandon my phone hit me hard. Gu had installed cross-device location sync on every gadget I owned, and any cell signal trail would lead him straight to the tea house within minutes if I brought the device along. Lynn offered to hold onto my phone, store it in her locked bedroom safe, while I left by a taxi with nothing but a small fabric coin purse and the folded medical slip Dr. Lee had given me originally. I changed into plain, unremarkable streetwear, pulled a loose baseball cap and disposable face mask over my features to avoid being recognized by any of Gu's hired casual informants he'd stationed around popular commercial zones. I arrived at the tea house 10 minutes ahead of the agreed time, slipping quietly up the wooden staircase to the marked private booth. Dr. Lee was already seated inside, dressed in casual civilian clothes instead of her hospital scrubs, her shoulders slouched with a weight of unspoken grief the second she spotted me enter the room. She gestured for me to slide the booth door shut and twist the privacy lock into place before pouring a steaming pot of jasmine tea into 2 ceramic cups, pushing one across the table toward me. I've replayed that moment at the clinic 100 times over since I handed you the report, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper, eyes glistening with suppressed guilt. I watched you light up talking about your upcoming wedding, same soft, hopeful look my cousin Zhang Qian had when she first started dating Guan back in university. I couldn't stand by and watch another young woman walk straight into the same nightmare she endured for years on end. The hidden truth unfolded slow, piece by piece, as Dr. Lee recounted Zhang's tragic history, every detail peeling back another layer of Gu's monstrous dual identity. They'd met as undergraduates. Zhang head over heels smitten with his polished, charming public persona, blind to the simmering violent temper he kept locked away until after their wedding ceremony. The first time he struck her had stemmed from a trivial argument over household budgeting. Afterward, he'd broken down sobbing, fallen to his knees begging forgiveness, showering her with expensive jewelry and elaborate apologies to manipulate her into forgiving him. It was the classic cycle of abuse, violence, remorse, lavish appeasement, then a repeat of the same cruelty once he felt secure in her loyalty. He didn't just hit her randomly, Dr. Lee explained, her knuckles white where she gripped her teacup tight. He learned to target areas covered by clothing so no visible bruising would show at family gatherings or public outings, isolating her from all friends and family bit by bit, cutting off every outside support system she might lean on if she wanted to leave him. By the end, she developed textbook Stockholm Syndrome. She'd rationalize every beating as her own fault, convinced his rage only flared because she'd failed to love him hard enough to calm his stress. One night 3 years prior, Zhang snuck out of their apartment in the dead of night, blood seeping from fresh rib fractures she'd sustained after he'd slammed her against the wall during a screaming fight. She'd stumbled all the way to Dr. Lee's private residence begging for emergency medical care, too terrified to visit a mainstream hospital where Gu's family connections might intercept her treatment records. Dr. Lee had coordinated a confidential, off-the-books scan with a trusted colleague at a separate clinic, generating the full diagnostic report she'd later slip into my hands at the premarital exam. She'd urged Zhang to file formal domestic violence charges and move back in with her family immediately, but Zhang had shaken her head, too brainwashed to believe she deserved to escape his control. Gu tracked her down within hours of her leaving the house. Dr. Lee's voice cracked as she recounted the memory. He showed up at my front door plastered with fake remorse, wrapped his arms around her, and talked her into coming home with him right then. I tried to stop her, but she pulled away from my grip and followed him out to his car without a single backward glance. I never heard from her again after that day. She reached into the small canvas crossbody bag resting beside her chair, pulling out a tiny antiquated brass key and sliding it across the wooden tabletop toward me. The metal surface was worn smooth from years of constant handling, etched with a delicate floral engraving along its shaft. This is the last thing she left with me before Gu took her back. She said it's a hidden compartment key for a mahogany jewelry chest he keeps locked inside their master bedroom walk-in closet. That chest belonged to her as part of her bridal dowry, but he's always treated it like a trophy case he refuses to let anyone touch. Zhang had confided in Dr. Lee that she'd stashed every piece of evidence documenting Gu's years of abuse inside the chest's secret hollow base. Photographs of her broken bones, audio recordings of his screaming threats, dated hospital diagnostic slips matching the report I now held in my possession. Gu's arrogance had led him to store all proof of his own crimes in plain sight, convinced no one would ever dare dig through his personal belongings to uncover the truth. She modified the key's internal circuitry before giving it to me, Dr. Lee added, glancing down at the small metal object I'd picked up between my fingers. There's a miniature passive location tracker embedded inside the brass casing. If you ever take this key back to their shared residence, the signal will broadcast my way, so I can alert law enforcement the second you're trapped in danger at his hands. My throat tightened as I turned the tiny key over in my palm, realizing the single insignificant-looking trinket was both my only lifeline and the sole weapon I had to take Gu down and uncover what had truly happened to Zhang 3 years prior. I thanked Dr. Lee repeatedly, slipping the key deep into the inner pocket of my jacket before standing to leave the booth, careful to avoid drawing attention as I slipped out the tea house's back service exit to evade any potential surveillance Gu might have stationed along the main front sidewalk. When I arrived back at Lynn's apartment an hour later, I laid the brass key and medical paperwork side by side on her coffee table, both of us silent for a long stretch as we mapped out the high-risk plan we'd be forced to execute. Return to the shared apartment under Gu's nose, break open the hidden jewelry chest, retrieve every piece of incriminating evidence Zhang had hidden, and escape before he could catch me rummaging through his most prized possession. I spent the whole night sorting all the evidence Dr. Lee handed me, the brass key clutched in my palm nonstop. Every word she told me replayed in my head over and over, forming a complete timeline of Gu and's violent manipulation, and a critical hidden detail kept nagging at me that I hadn't caught during our tea house talk. I decided to go back to our shared apartment the next morning under the excuse of fetching my forgotten textbook set, knowing Gu would be buried in corporate morning meetings and wouldn't return until late afternoon. Lynn offered to drive me over and wait downstairs in her sedan, ready to dial police the second the tracker signal from the key sent out an emergency alert to Dr. Lee's device. I unlocked the apartment door quietly, the whole space cold and lifeless, without Zhang's small decorative trinkets scattered across every surface. Gu had tossed out every item that belonged to her 3 years prior, erasing all traces of her existence, as if she'd never lived here at all. I walked straight to the master walk-in closet, the tall mahogany jewelry chest sitting against the far wall, just as Dr. Lee described it. The lock was a tiny vintage tumbler mechanism matching the floral carving on the brass key, and I slid the metal shaft inside with a steady hand, twisting it gently until I heard a soft click. The front drawer popped open, but there was nothing inside except empty velvet pouches. I followed Zhang's description, pressing a thin indentation on the base panel, and a hidden hollow compartment slid outward with a faint scrape. Stacked neatly inside were thick folders bound with rubber bands, printed hospital diagnostic records matching the report Dr. Lee gave me, dated photo prints of swollen bruises and fractured limbs, voice recording chips stored in plastic sleeves, and dozens of handwritten journals detailing every beating, every cycle of fake apology and lavish gift manipulation Gu used to trap her. I pulled out one audio chip and slotted it into my portable player tucked in my pocket. Gu's sharp, enraged roar blared out through tiny earbuds, clear and unfiltered. He slammed furniture, screamed that she was useless for daring to question his control, and threatened to lock her inside the closet for days without food or water if she ever tried contacting her family again. I paused the playback, my chest tight with cold rage, and began sorting every piece of evidence into a waterproof document bag I'd brought along for storage. Halfway through organizing the folders, a separate sealed envelope tucked at the very bottom of the hidden slot caught my eye. The handwriting was Zhang's, faded from years of being locked away. I tore the wax seal open and unfolded the letter, my breath catching mid-read. She'd written this note days before she snuck out to Dr. Lee's house that night, laying out a secret double standard I'd never once suspected existed. This became the third major plot twist of the whole story, fully exposing Gu's hypocritical core motive. Zhang's letter explained that Gu had never once planned to uphold the equal partnership he'd promised their families. He'd spent months drafting legal paperwork to transfer all of her parental inheritance and family dowry assets solely into his personal account, and the repeated domestic abuse was a calculated tactic to wear her down until she'd sign every property transfer document without resistance. Once all her wealth belonged to him, he intended to lock her away in a remote countryside villa and cut off all her outside contact permanently. The fabricated elopement with her rich lover, rumor he'd spread across the city, was pre-planned, a cover story ready to deploy the second he seized full control of her finances. I folded the letter carefully and placed it with the rest of the evidence, slipping the entire waterproof bag into my inner coat pocket. As I closed the jewelry chest's hidden compartment and locked it back up with the brass key, my phone buzzed once. The silent tracker alert Dr. Lee set up sent a safe signal, confirming no unusual movement around the building yet. I wiped every surface I'd touched with a wet tissue to erase fingerprints, then headed for the front door, ready to meet Lynn downstairs. Just as I gripped the doorknob, the front hallway's elevator dinged sharply. Gu stepped out of the lift early, his leather briefcase slung over one shoulder, his gaze locking onto me the second he spotted my figure in the living room. He hadn't expected me to show up at the apartment during work hours, and a flicker of alarm crossed his face before he masked it with his usual cold, dismissive arrogance. "What are you doing here unannounced?" His tone was sharp, suspicious, eyes darting toward the master bedroom closet behind me. "I didn't tell you to come over today." I kept my expression neutral, hiding the bulging evidence bag under my coat as I gestured toward the study shelf. "I left my professional design textbooks here last week before moving to Lynn's place temporarily. I only stopped by to pick them up and won't stay long." Gu didn't buy my casual excuse, stepping forward to block my path to the entryway, his body language tense and defensive. "You've been meeting with that doctor who gave you random medical papers, haven't you? Don't think I don't have people watching every clinic within a 5-kilometer radius of this district." I didn't flinch, staring straight back at him without backing down. "I only went for a routine physical screening, nothing out of the ordinary. There's no rule stopping me from visiting a licensed medical practitioner." He scoffed loudly, crossing his arms tight over his chest, that same patronizing sneer he used on Zhang resurfacing on his face. "You two women are cut from the same cloth, always stirring up groundless trouble over nothing. That cousin of mine wasted 3 years of my time throwing tantrums over trivial household arguments before she vanished off the face of the earth. I thought you were more level-headed than her. Turns out you're just as easy to manipulate into believing fabricated victimhood stories." His words confirmed everything I'd read in Zhang's letter. He'd rewritten history entirely to paint himself as the wronged party, erasing every violent act he'd committed and framing her escape as ungrateful abandonment. I tilted my head slightly, a faint, cold smile tugging at my lips as I posed a quiet question to test his reaction. If she truly left voluntarily for another wealthy man, why lock all her personal assets away in that mahogany chest and draft legal papers to seize her inheritance before she supposedly ran off? Gu's face paled instantly, all his fake calm crumbling in a split second. He never anticipated I'd uncover the hidden compartment or the asset transfer draft stashed inside it, and panic flared bright in his eyes before he reverted to rage to cover his shock. "You've been snooping through my private belongings without permission." He raised his voice loud enough to echo off the apartment walls, stepping forward and reaching out to grab my arm hard, fingers digging into my skin to trap me in place. "Hand over whatever papers you took out of that closet right now, or I'll call security and charge you with breaking and entering and theft of personal property." I twisted my wrist free of his grip with a sharp, deliberate movement, stepping backward to create space between us, the waterproof evidence bag still securely hidden under my outerwear. This apartment held her bridal dowry chest, not just your private possessions. Every document inside belongs to Zhang, and all the records prove your years of domestic violence and premeditated asset theft. Gu's temper fully snapped. He lunged forward to grab my bag, aiming to tear it off my body and destroy all the incriminating proof inside. I sidestepped his charge nimbly, dodging his outstretched hands, and pulled out the brass key from my coat pocket, holding it up between us for him to see clearly. "Zhang left this tracking key with Dr. Li before you dragged her back here 3 years ago. Every minute I'm inside this space sends a location signal straight to a licensed medical practitioner who's ready to contact the police the second I'm placed in danger. If you lay a single hand on me right now, law enforcement will arrive at this building within 10 minutes flat." Gu froze mid-lunge, his outstretched arms hanging suspended in the air, the weight of his own crimes crashing down on him all at once. He knew the evidence locked inside that hidden compartment was irrefutable proof of felony domestic abuse and financial fraud, and he couldn't risk police being called to the residence with all those documents in my possession. He lowered his hand slowly, his jaw tight with suppressed fury, unable to come up with any counterargument to refute the piles of records I held. I didn't waste another second lingering in the toxic apartment. I sidestepped around his rigid frame and walked straight out the front door, locking the deadbolt shut behind me without a single backward glance. When I reached Lynn's sedan parked at the curb, I climbed into the passenger seat and pulled the full stack of evidence out onto her lap, spreading every photo, journal page, and legal draft across the leather surface for her to scan through. Lynn's eyes widened as she flipped through the asset transfer paperwork Zhang had hidden, her voice low with quiet horror. He planned to steal all her family wealth before she even had a chance to escape, and beat her repeatedly to wear her spirit thin enough to sign everything over. All those rumors about her eloping were a pre-planned cover-up to avoid taking legal accountability for his crimes. I nodded, folding the documents back into the waterproof bag and zipping it securely closed. That's the hidden double standard no one around the city knew about until now. He presented himself as the grieving, abandoned partner to the public, while secretly plotting to strip her of every cent of her family's fortune and lock her away permanently. We hold all the proof needed to press full criminal charges against him, once we finish compiling a complete, organized case file for the district police station.